Yeah.
Or the Cosby Show. Yeah, they're lepers now. They won't touch them.
Yeah. The only way I can see it is go on the internet.
It's a shame. You know, we'll never understand what happened with Bill and you know, how he turned like that or why he did that and so forth. I don't even like to think about it because I admired him all my life. You know, he was one of my heroes. Loved his comedy albums, loved that show, loved what he represented for blacks and the positive image he portrayed. And he was very gracious and friendly to me when I interviewed him. And so this was just a big shock and a great sadness and a heartache. But the show is important, and the show's there. And, you know, it's a shame that a lot of people do that. When somebody falls from grace, and this is a big fall, but when somebody falls from grace, it's like all the good work they did in the past is erased. And I don't know if that's right. Well, I don't think it's good tearing pages out of history books.
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't have I Spy, seriously, a lot of shows that came afterwards would have never happened. You know, and plus, again, it was like one of the first shows where they went worldwide and traveled. They really got into the shows, and I have to be honest with you, Robert Culp.
Well, let me tell you, Gary, you're absolutely right, and let me tell you how right you are. I mean, first of all, Star Trek would have still come on the air. It would have come on the very next year, but it wouldn't have had an interracial cast. So that's an entirely different Star Trek. Secondly, I mentioned Hawaii Five-0 a moment ago. That show ran for 12 years. That show would have never happened because it was Fuad Sayed's equipment that was being used on I Spy that was then used on Hawaii Five-0 because there was no production facilities in Hawaii. That was a very ambitious show and a pioneering show. And Bullet. You remember the movie Bullet with Steve McQueen?
Oh, yeah.
Fuad Sayed's equipment, the I Spy equipment, was used for that car chase down the hills and everything else because they were shooting up there in San Francisco during their third year. And they went on to hiatus. And so Fuad stayed up there with his little cameras and his light equipment, his wireless microphones, and they put them in Steve McQueen's Mustang. And that put us, the audience, inside that car. We had never seen anything like that before. We had never experienced anything like that in a movie before. So many things, you know, when a show is an important show, like I Spy, like Star Trek, things grow out of it. Like the Beatles. Groups grow out of the Beatles. You know, music grows out of that music. When you have that big of an impact, so it's like dropping a pebble in water and watching the ripples go out there. Now you take that pebble away, it's a whole different world.
Yeah. And, you know, I hate to say it, Robert Culp told me, and this was like a couple of weeks before he, you know, passed on, we were texting or emailing back and forth. You know, I think he was getting bitter because, you know, he was typecast. And, you know, he wrote his own movie with with Bill Cosby. It was kind of a takeoff of I Spy, but as being detectives. And it was a
Boggs, and he directed that as well. It was a wonderful movie.
Yeah, I loved it, but you know the critics just slammed it.
Yeah, and I don't know why. It's a good movie, and that was, if it had been a hit, that would have launched Robert Culp as a director, as a writer. He was already writing scripts for I Spy, and but he wanted to direct too, and so he wore 3 different hats in that movie and did them all wonderful. I think it's a great movie, and he loved it, but it didn't hit. It didn't hit, and so that killed that. But he, you know, they were offering him series. He was burned out from I Spy, traveling around the world for 4 years. It was on for 3 seasons, but it was in production for 4. So traveling the world for 4 years and writing scripts on your days off, you know, for the show and so forth. And they made the banter up. They would rewrite every script. He and Cosby would sit down and change the dialogue in every one of these scripts. So they're working like you can't imagine. And after 4 years of that, he was exhausted. And so he didn't want to do another TV series for many years and didn't until America's Greatest Superhero. But they offered him a lot of stuff. Gene Roddenberry offered him a show called Spectre in the late 70s. He did the pilot, and NBC liked it, and they wanted to do a series based on it. And he backed out at the last minute. He said, I didn't agree to do a series. I agreed to do a TV movie. And now you want to make a series out of it. I don't want to do the series. And NBC said, well, if we're not going to have him, we don't want to do the series. That's how much in demand he was. But he didn't want to do that. Did you know right before he died, he actually got a green light on a script that he had written and rewritten and been carrying around for a lot of years.
Oh, yeah.
On Terry and the Pirates, one of his pet projects, a dream project he always wanted to make. And they finally got a green light, and they had the funding, and he was going to direct it. And the last time I talked to him, he was really excited about that, and he was showing me the storyboards and everything. And then he went out for a walk. He was in great shape. He went out for a walk, and he fell and hit his head on a rock and died. And they don't know, or I never found out. I went to the memorial service with his family, and they didn't know then. They didn't know if he had had a heart attack and fallen and hit his head, or if he had just fallen and hit his head and then had a heart attack. But the two things combined caused his death. But I remember him saying, being all happy that day when I got him on the phone, and he says, "You know what? We went out on top." And that's how I feel good and stop feeling bad when I think about it, because when he died, he knew he was going to get this pet project made, and he was feeling like he was on top of the world.
Now, wasn't that going to be filmed in Hong Kong or somewhere?
I believe so.
Yeah. He was telling me a little bit about it, and I think maybe a couple months before he had this happen to where he died, he was, going there and, walking the streets where they wanted to, film it and all this stuff to get ideas. So, I mean, It's sad that he passed. He was a great guy.
And his daughter was out there. She was a teacher teaching English as a second language, and she was in Hong Kong. And when I was interviewing him for the books, he said, "Mark, get a picture of me and Bill being pulled around in those carts." I can't think of the name they're called, but where the runner takes you through the streets and you're sitting in the carriage. And so I got him one of those promotional pictures, because it's an authorized book, and so we had access to all the pictures, and I got him one, and he framed it and sent it out to his daughter, who was in Hong Kong at that time. And it was shortly after that he got the green light on this thing, and I know that was one of the places he wanted to go do some filming.
Oh, yeah.
I think he was about ready to leave on a location scouting trip.
Yeah, well, I know that he, just about a month or two before that, he went to Hong Kong, and he told me that he walked the streets and he was getting all these ideas and for the movie and all that stuff, and he was really proud. Again, it was strange. Like, the first couple, when I went on to his website, I never thought he'd respond. And, and I figured, this guy is a jerk, because he was really hostile towards me. And then I kind of said something back, and, he was kind of still hostile. And then I said something else, and all of a sudden he just totally changed. And it was weird.
There were two Bob Kulps. Robert was kind of a brooding method actor who got trained at the Lee Strasberg classes in New York City in the 50s, and was a stage actor and did a lot of live TV and went on from there and was into writing and so forth. And that's Robert. That was the serious side. And then there was Bob, who was like Kelly Robinson on a good day, when he and Bill Cosby would be doing banter on I Spy, which was they were writing. And so when he would call me, sometimes he would call and there'd be this serious voice, and he'd say, "Hi, Mark, it's Robert." And I'd say, "Okay, this is going to be a serious talk." And a couple of days later, the phone rang, and I'd say, "Hello," and he'd say, "Hey, Mark, it's Bob." And it was like, oh, this is going to be a fun conversation. So there were two sides of his personality, which is the case a lot of times with actors. And but while one side was more fun and more responsive, both sides had equal good ethics and good intent. And he was a perfectionist. He did his best work every time out, no matter what it was. And so I have great respect for him.
I will say this in one message, and then we'll get into Star Trek. He did tell me that, Kelly Robinson was him. It was him, flawed, with all his flaws. Yep. Yeah.
Yep. And if since you know the show, I mean, there were quite a few episodes that were dark, that weren't buddy concept, buddy genre, kind of light and banter and everything else. They did their share of very moody, dark episodes, and we saw Kelly Robinson get down there into the dark area on quite a few occasions. And so, you saw both sides of Bob Kulp in that show, and he revealed himself.
Oh, yeah.
Quite often would write those scripts. He would write the scripts that were the most poignant. So he revealed himself in that show. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I miss it. Now, getting into Star Trek, the original one, who's the one who picked like Shatner and all these people, and Leonard Nimoy to be on the show?
Roddenberry. And here's the funny thing. The guy they wanted right from the beginning was Leonard Nimoy and Bill Shatner. And Leonard Nimoy had been a guest star on The Lieutenant, which was the series that Gene Roddenberry created and produced right before Star Trek. And he met a lot of his Star Trek writers and directors and actors doing that show. And Leonard Nimoy had been a guest star. And Gene told me this, but I also was told this by Gary Lockwood of 2001, and he was in the second pilot. And he told me he was over at Gene's house, and Gene was saying, I've come up with this character, and he's very serious, and I want him to look a little bit kind of alien, his bone structure, and I'm trying to think of who it is. And Gary said, Gene, it's that guy, because Gary was the star of The Lieutenant. And Gary said, Gene, it's that guy was in one of the episodes. And he, his name was Lenny or something, and Roddenberry looked at him and said, Nimoy, Leonard Nimoy. Boom. And from that point on, he knew that that's who he wanted. Well, the same thing with Shatner. Shatner, the three hottest actors in television in the late 50s and the early 60s that everybody wanted to get for a series was Bob Kulp, William Shatner, and Jack Lord. There were other great actors who came out of television, too. Paul Newman, Robert Redford, James Dean. But they went into the movies pretty quickly. But these three were on television a lot. They would get the best guest starring roles, and everybody was offering series to them. Shatner had been offered The Defenders, and he turned it down. So Robert Reed got it from the Brady Bunch later, the dad.
Uh-huh.
He got The Defenders with E.G. Marshall. And Shatner was offered a couple other series he turned down. Bob Kulp was offered Man from U.N.C.L.E. Jack Lord was offered Man from U.N.C.L.E. They both turned it down, so Robert Vaughn got it and made a star out of him and so on. So Shatner, they wanted Shatner, but he was doing another series. He was doing a series called For the People, where he played a DA.
I remember that.
And it only lasted 13 weeks. Nobody remembers it. It was on CBS. It was on Sunday nights. And it was up against Bonanza, and it got killed. But he was committed to that show when they were doing the first Star Trek pilot. So Roddenberry couldn't get Shatner, so he got Jeffrey Hunter, who was a movie star, but he had come over and done a show called Temple Houston. And they looked a little alike, the same type, square-jawed, leading man, light brown hair, good physique, the whole bit. So he got Jeffrey Hunter, and they did the first pilot, The Cage, and NBC turned it down because it was too cerebral, and they wanted Star Trek to be more action-adventure-oriented. So for the first time in the history of television, the network ordered a second pilot. And I'll have to tell you something about that in a moment, but we'll stick with Shatner right at the moment. And so Shatner's show was still on. It was in production. It was about to be canceled, but nobody knew that. So the first person they went to was the other guy. The three guys were Bob Kulp, William Shatner, and Jack Lord. They went to Jack Lord, and Jack Lord agreed to be Captain Kirk. And but he wanted 25% ownership of the show, and because he had 25% in his previous series called Stony Brook, and he ended up getting 25% of Hawaii Five-0 as well. And Shatner went to Dorothy Fontana, and Dorothy told me this story. It's great. She was his secretary, Gene's secretary, and he came in and he said, she said, so do we have Jack? And he said, no, we're not going to go with him. He takes his name a little too seriously. And he wasn't referring to Jack. So Jack Lord was not Captain Kirk. And he asked Lloyd Bridges, who had just come off a sea hunt, and Lloyd Bridges said, I don't want to do a science fiction. And so they were trying to think, who can we get? And right at that moment, they picked up Daily Variety and saw that For the People had just gotten the axe. And so Roddenberry called Shatner and said, I want you to be in this show. Shatner came out and sat and watched the first pilot with Jeffrey Hunter. And he said, "Done. I'll do it."